Right now, it is time to bring in David Tereshchuk. David joins us on a Friday morning with the Media Beat. We take a look at the way media is covering certain stories and what stories they are covering. David has his own website called themediabeat.us. David is also a PBS television correspondent reporting on ethics and belief, and we're always privileged to have him join us on a Friday morning. Good morning, David.
Hello there. I'm glad to be reporting in again from the media capital of the world, New York City, and talking with the ever-cool observer, Marshall Miles. Where should we start?
Well, I'll use the term Armageddon.
Oh, my goodness.
We've got so
Let's
much.
go for the big, bold headlines. Which particular division of Armageddon are you thinking of?
That's why I'm saying Armageddon. There's just so many different areas we can go to and touch upon, and it goes from war, it goes to courts, it goes to marijuana, it goes to a shooting. This time not in the United States but elsewhere. I mean, there's just so many different things we can look at. We will start off. I do believe what we should start off with is what is going on in the Ukraine, because there's good news and bad news there. There's some journalists that have been recognized. I don't know if they're journalists, but they're people that have been recognized for their work on that.
Sure. Just in the last hour, the Nobel Peace Prize. It's always a very significant event every year, and somebody gets a phone call in the middle of the night telling them, to their surprise, usually, that they are the Nobel Peace Prize winner of the year. Well, this year it's three sets of people, all of them human rights campaigners in Russia. In Belarus, an individual there who's, of course, like many a human rights campaigner in Belarus, is in jail, and also, of course, Ukraine. Ukraine's a human rights organization, which now is a Nobel Peace Prize winner, is in many ways analogous with the American civil rights, as we call them in this country, campaigners. The American Center for the American Civil Rights Union, ACLU, well known to everyone, of course, in that it keeps a watchful eye on human rights for Ukrainians themselves. I mean, it's not totally a fully fledged democracy yet. Ukraine, I think everyone recognizes that, and they have a full-time job monitoring abuses there. But in the last 6-7 months, much of its work has been dedicated to very rigorous documenting of, and for that it will use journalists. So you're right to assume there's a sort of alliance of interest with journalism. What they've been doing is cataloging human rights abuses and outright war crimes committed by the Russians. So it's another pretty clear message from from the Nobel Committee. Where they stand on what's happening as a result of Putin's domination or his efforts to increase his domination of that part of Eastern Europe. It comes at an interesting time. For a start, I think this can scarcely be an accident, and certainly the Human Rights Watch in the United States, led by Kenneth Roth. Kenneth put out an interesting statement today saying this is so appropriate that it is happening on Putin's birthday. Putin is 70 today, so the prize goes to one of Putin's strongest detractors, the human rights organization in Moscow, Memorial, which was set up in Soviet time to combat that era's oppression, but is still trying its best to protest as strongly as it can, which is, of course, very limited under Putin himself. The present day Stalinist is an adjective that's being used about him often these days.
But
the interesting thing to say about Putin's position right now, I think, as we look at Russia itself, is how much disaffection there is amongst Putin's own supporters. I mean, arguments among Russia's elite about the invasion of Ukraine. Now, these are not human rights supporters, of course. They're angry at the invasion or the limited military operation, as they call it, is just not working out the way they wanted it to. It began, and these divisions among the elite are spilling over into public view now. Very interesting development for such a closed society as, it's certainly closed down any over criticism normally, but now this new openness, relative openness anyway, began with an openly published tirade against the incompetence of the military leadership that came from a strongman ruler, Ramzan Kadyrov of Chechnya, the southern Russia-controlled republic. He's been in charge since 2009 after that vicious Russian war in Chechnya against the Chechen separatists. It sort of started in other circumstances, you might use the word a bandwagon of critiques, quite remarkable for modern-day Russia. Even a boss installed by Putin of one of those Ukraine regions occupied and illegally annexed by Putin has climbed onto the wagon too. And now prominent members of the Russian parliament are speaking up as well. And so is, now this is of special interest, I think, or especially piquant, the corporate boss, Yevgeny Prigozhin, who runs the Wagner Group, that private company that supplies mercenary soldiers, has agreed with the criticisms. And this is an oligarch who's known to be very close to Putin. And the Washington Post, I just noticed, is saying that Joe Biden's daily intelligence briefing has now included evidence gathered, obviously covertly, of people very close to Putin. In addition to Prigozhin, it would seem, who are telling him to his face privately that he's making, one big mistake after another. The new kinds of dissent at the very top coming forward about Putin's conduct of his so-called military operation. What about Vladimir Putin himself? There's no comment from him about this so far. We might want to rechristen him Vlad the Blunted Impaler with apologies to his bloodthirsty predecessor of the terror of late medieval Eastern Europe. He's not having the impact that he intended.
One of the reasons I use the word Armageddon is because with Putin, with what he said, and with what some of the other folks that back Putin said about using limited tactical nuclear weapons, Joe Biden at a fundraiser basically used the word. We are closer than ever to Armageddon since basically the Bay of Pigs, and you add that in with everything else, and it is a very, very precarious position that the entire world finds itself in. Even non-combatants or countries that have no relationship to the war at all.
Well, it's frightening for us all. There's no doubt about that. Some of these internal critics are of course, of the hawkish variety, by no means peaceniks. And one of the things that they've been doing, kind of obviously, which is sort of the thing you do if you're a bully and you're in a corner, you reach for a bigger weapon. And some of them are urging Putin to use what they call tactical nuclear weapons. But of course, if that starts, where does it go? The inevitable fear is that it's going to go far more than tactical and strategic long-range nuclear missiles will be employed. That's a scenario for complete disaster. None of us want that, we would think. But there are people, I mean, this is the problem. There are people who are thinking in terms of limited use, they would say, of these Armageddon-type weapons. And that, of course, is deeply worrying.
I want to move on for just a second here while we're talking about Ukraine and Joe Biden's little speech. Once again, Joe Biden, Slow Joe, has pulled out of his hat a rabbit. Now, this is not going to affect a lot of people. It's only going to affect about 6,000 to 10,000 people. But he has pardoned thousands of people who've been in jail. These have to be federal jails. For just plain marijuana use, marijuana use. Now, it's only, I think, 5,000 to 10,000 people, I guess. But what President Biden is hoping will happen is now that he has done that, more states will come on board and do the same thing.
Yeah, 6,500 thereabouts, and not all of them incarcerated. No. I mean, the main point is that they are, if not in custodial, not serving custodial sentences, but they do have a misdemeanor on their criminal record, and that damages their life sometimes forever. But the pardon will wipe the slate clean, and it's quite it's a symbolic gesture, but a significant one. And as you say, it's for those people who have committed offences simply by possession of relatively small amounts of marijuana. The present state situation, as far as the Biden administration is concerned, seems to be that they will continue to be vigilant against large-scale trafficking, and of course any crimes that involve violence connected with marijuana trafficking. So the message is clear. It's a tilt towards the many states that already treat marijuana as essentially a decriminalized form of drug consumption. And along with this is probably something much more significant. Biden is asking all the federal agencies that have an interest in this, including Health and Human Services, excuse me, to consider what kind of a drug marijuana should be considered to be in legal terms. Is it scheduled? What kind of schedule it's in? At the moment, it's in the first schedule, which includes hard use drugs like heroin. Now, whether it deserves to stay there is the question being addressed now very fully and very decidedly as a result of an order from the very top. And that, I think, is going to have a really quite considerable influence on many people's future right across the United States. And it's, as you say, Slow Joe's not so slow. He's making some radical differences. And there are other areas in which that is true, too. He's had a rough time getting stuff through this split and in many ways log-jammed Congress. But infrastructure and climate change legislation is now in place. And, one can't help, looking for the political spin on all of this, and the knowledge that we're only weeks away now from the midterm elections, where it's still hoped by some optimistic Democrats that they can pull off some way of retaining control of, well, it's hardly control, but a majority of a kind in the House, and might be able to hold on to their 50-50 split, and perhaps even get an extra seat in the Senate. So that would be 51 to 49 there. It's hard to say whether those optimistic notions are in any way likely to be satisfied. But it's interesting that while historically speaking, midterms for any president always end up being a referendum on his performance, and it's not looking good for him in that broad sense. But it's possible. You never know. We've been those of us who are foolish enough to try and predict the elections have been proven wrong.
That's
Basically
right.
wrong several times over in recent election years. We have to remember that too.
And looking at the broader things, we can look into Canada. 11 people were killed in a knifing. You're looking at what happened in Thailand with this, and look at the upheaval going on in Iran that doesn't look like it's going to end anytime soon. But violence is just a key word around the globe.
Oh, sure. When is it not? But I suppose one important thing to hold on to in all of this is a perspective. The degree of or the sheer volume of arms possession in Thailand, for instance, is said to be very high, and much of the weapons possession is illegal. It's very poorly regulated. But in fact, shootings of the kind, mass shootings of the kind that America is more than used to, are relatively very rare, I'd say, in Thailand. Although actually it isn't all that long since the last one, only 2 years. But on a broad span of time, they don't happen very often. But now we have one, a horrible one. But at the same time, America remains unique. There are something like 500 of those mass shootings defined as over four deaths in any one incident in this year, and there are still 2 months or more of this year to go. It's a distinction we don't want, but America remains preeminent for this mass violence, mostly through using guns. Although we have our share of stabbing, mass killings too, every now and again. But yeah, it's what to say about it. We can look to other countries and say that this is a worldwide problem. But the fact is that London. What am I talking about? The United States of America remains the preeminent area for this kind of modern-day crime. What I would like to talk about, just because it struck me as possibly the most striking media image of the week, Marshall, is from the cleanup operation, the recovery operation and cleanup in Florida in the wake of Hurricane Ian. And it's Governor Ron DeSantis, who we may look to expect being very active in the next round of elections. He may well end up pushing for the Republican nomination for president. So Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida was on duty for the post-hurricane damage assessment, and he shows up in what actually looked like shiny white knee-high disco boots. Do you see these pictures?
Yes.
Quite extraordinary.
He looked like
he's not going to be allowed to forget it.
he looked like a Dallas Cowboy cheerleader.
Exactly. All sorts of references come up in relation to this. I mean, the go-go dancers, Nancy Sinatra's kitschy masterpiece, These Boots Were Made for Walking, a song you're probably too young to remember, Marshall.
No. I not only do I remember it, David, but I saw Nancy Sinatra perform it.
In white knee-high boots.
Yes,
sure.
yes.
and this is a reference that I hadn't really noticed before until it was pointed out by all the commentary on this extraordinary footwear for the governor. Is the fact that the green M&M character in the chocolate candies animated commercials wears those same boots. I didn't know that. I hadn't noticed. But yes, what a comparison for DeSantis. I mean, and DeSantis, of course, just very recently has made a great public display of how unwelcome immigrants were in his state, pretty crudely at that, shipping them off to Massachusetts and New York at no notice, and expecting other people to take care of them. But regardless of this attitude toward migrants, CNN has been reporting that hundreds and thousands of migrant workers are rushing to Florida now to help with the recovery work. Saket Soni is the executive director of the nonprofit Resilience Force. It represents disaster response workers. Is being quoted by CNN and others who followed the story also, saying that they're all arriving from New York, from Louisiana, from Houston, Dallas, and these workers are largely immigrants, many of whom are undocumented, again, according to Sony. They crisscross, just as a fact of life, they crisscross the United States, helping to clean up and rebuild whenever disaster of any kind strikes. A bit like the more predictable travel of agricultural workers who follow harvest seasons, and they travel from farm to farm in different regions. There's a lot of skills that they bring to bear. Especially at this early start of recovery, the stopgap work of putting tarps on roofs that have been blown off and that kind of thing. Pretty essential work. Governor DeSantis knows about them. Of course he does. You can't not know about them if you're in Florida. But on the other hand, he also used a press conference this week to inject the news about the recovery work that among the people caught allegedly looting flooded premises, there were three, count them, three so-called illegal aliens. I guess you see what you look for and what's politically convenient for you to see. Not that I want to be cynical about it, of course, but that's the well-booted Governor DeSantis this week.
Talking about Florida, we have a weekend meteorologist, and he lives exactly where the eye wall crossed. And we didn't think we'd be hearing from him for a while because his quote to us was, as a meteorologist, he has never been so scared in his life. He was lucky in one fact that his house is 35 feet above sea level. So he didn't get the huge waves crashing into his house. But they lost total power, everything like that. But to show you how it went so far for him, he got power back, and he's got the ability back so he can be our meteorologist again this weekend. And the work that is going on in Florida is absolutely simply amazing. Now, it's going to take years and years to recover, but the immediate work to try to bring things back, they put one of these causeway bridges, a temporary causeway bridge, together in a matter of 3 days. It's astounding the work that's going on in the state of Florida.
Yeah, the challenges presented are huge. And of course, it's a somber point to recognize that the death toll now has crept up over 100. And it's now assessed as being the strongest and worst hurricane to hit Florida since before the Second World War. So, yes, the challenges are huge. The recovery period will be extended. And I'm afraid to say, rumbling along through it, with politics being what they are, is that a ambitious state governor like Ron DeSantis wants to make political capital out of it as well. But what would be new about that? It's an observation which I think we can make in just about any large-scale public event. Politics are going to rear their ugly head, whether we like it or not.
And the Department of Justice has made it clear they want all the documents back from Donald Trump. They just made it clear with a press release again yesterday. They want them.
Right, and there may be more, of course. So that's the underlying suggestion there. Where this is not over by any means.
It's an interesting. I always say this. I thought when I was young and I lived in the 70s and Richard Nixon's resignation in the Vietnam War and the end of the Vietnam War, I thought that was a turbulent time. And indeed, it was. You had Kent State where American troops shot American citizens. It was a turbulent time. But the time we're living in now is a much more much more turbulent time, and it's not only in this country, but it's throughout the world.
I'm not going to disagree.
Yeah.
I found that period you're talking about very stirring. One of the reasons I think that I went into journalism as a young man. But I think I'm rather with you that we're now in the end it's a very subjective kind of judgment. But it's very disturbing, the reaches and the extent of a kind of unruly mood to the nation, much of the world. It's very disturbing indeed.
David, it's always great to talk to you. We'll speak to you next week.
Absolutely. Look forward to that.
David Tereshchuk with the Media Beat here on The Breakfast Club on Robin Hood Radio.